Hello everyone! In this tutorial I will share some techniques and tips you can use when creating text designs. I will focus on creating custom editable text effects using the file objects, but also how to use them as a base to achieve more creative results. The topics we'll cover are the text tool, file objects, basic effects, mixing techniques, and animation. Feel free to skip any section if you want. Without much further ado, let's start. Text tool. Okay, for the basics operation of the text tool, we select the text tool. We choose a font, our size. We can select a style, a justification, the color, and then we click on the canvas and type whatever we want. Then we confirm the changes and we have created a text layer. We can edit this text by double clicking with the text tool and changing whatever we want. Here I will add another line to show the justification and line spacing settings. In the tool property panel we can change the color, we can play with different parameters like the alignment, the justification, the character spacing, the line spacing, the word spacing, and of course we can change the size, and we can play also with the style of the text. Here I play with the background color and edge. We can also use the transformation properties like scale and rotation, and if we want to further edit the text layer we can use the object tool. To access all the settings in the tool property panel, here we can change the font, we can play with the color and all the settings. Also, here's a quick tip: if you select the text tool, you can define a user color that no matter what color you have as a main, it will type with that color. In this case my main color is red, but my user color is pink, so as you can see it types with the user color, ignoring the main color. These are the basics of the text tool. Please try to get familiar with the different settings. If you don't find something in the tool property panel, you can click the wrench icon to show all the settings. As a final tip, we can create our custom font list by selecting the gear icon in the font selection menu, and here we can create a new list, name it, and select all the fonts we want to have in this list. This way we can select our favorite fonts, and then we can quickly access them by selecting the list in the font selection menu, and we don't have to scroll all the fonts in our system. File objects. Okay, to create editable designs, we are going to use a special kind of layer called file object. First, we are going to right-click the layer we want to convert into a file object, and we navigate in the menu to create it. Here we have the settings. In area we are going to select drawing area, and we keep the original layer. Here we are prompted to save the file. We can name it whatever we want. The program referenced this file to render the file object, so please remember where you save it and don't move it or delete it. And as you can see, we have the original file and the file object. In the tool property panel we can see the name, the path and the status. We can also change the file, open the location folder and update the file. Now we can edit the original file and it will change in any instance of the file object. So we click open, and as you can see, it opens its own file with the type layer. First, I will change the canvas size to give me some margins to work with. First, go to Edit, Canvas Properties, and then make the width and the height bigger. I do this to give me some margin of error when editing the text later on in this example. And in this case I decided to scale the type a little bit. So the basic use now, it will be to change the type and it will auto update in the project file. I make the changes with the text tool and then save it by pressing Ctrl S to save, and as you can see, it auto updates in the project file. As you can see, this is a really powerful feature. It will give us the base to make editable designs, since we can always edit the original file and it will update in the project. We just need to understand the advantages and the limitation of this type of layer to achieve the results we want. So let's talk about what we can do with file objects. First, the pros. Of course, they are editable. They are non-destructive. We can scale it down and then up and it will retain the original resolution. We can apply transformations such as rotation, scaling. We can reflect it. We can also use the different transformation modes such as free transform, distort and perspective. But we can always reset these transformations. Another powerful feature is duplicating the file object. We can create multiple instances of the same file object in our project, and then if we edit the original file, it will update in all the instances. And if we apply any transformation, they still update just fine. So this gives us a lot of flexibility when creating our effects. We can use the tiling features in the tool property panel to create tiling patterns. We can apply layer effects such as color or borders. This way it is really easy to change the appearance of any particular instance we want and create effects such as drop shadows or create volume. Another thing to keep in mind is that inside the file object we can have multiple layers. So if we create a new raster layer and paint with a brush, it will reflect in the project. For the limitation of this type of layers, we can't directly draw on them with any tool. We can't also apply filters, and we can't apply the mesh transformation. If we want to use these features, first we can duplicate the original layer and then right-click it, rasterize, to make it a raster layer. Now we can draw, apply any filter we want, and use the mesh transformation settings. As a side note, we can use the layer mask in the file object layers without any problem, so we can mask it if we need without rasterizing. Okay, so now we understand how file objects layers work and the limitations. So now what? Well, first we are going to start with simple effects to understand the different workflows when creating editable designs. And then we can move on to more complex and creative effects, combining different techniques. And then we are going to create editable animations. Basic designs. Okay, let's start with a simple design to show you my workflow. As you can see, I have a texture in the background and I have a file object with the text. So I like to create folders for organization. Then I create a duplicate of the file object and name it shadow. I apply a border and layer color effect, and then by moving the shadow layer we can create a simple shadow, reduce the opacity, and that's it. We have our first effect. I created a folder for the shadow and then I can edit it if I want. For example, I can open the file object and change the text. When we save, it updates in the project file and we can play with the placement of the shadow and change the color using the layer effects. That's it. This is a simple design, but it's the basic workflow I use as a base to create my effects. Here are the final results and another one with a different font. If we want a soft shadow, first we can duplicate the shadow group and merge it to rasterize it. Then we can go to Filter, Gaussian Blur and play with the settings. This way we achieve a simple soft shadow. With the same steps but playing with the transformation, we can achieve different results like a long shadow. In this example, I will show you how to create a glow. First, I have a dark background, a base with a layer color, a duplicate with a brighter color in the Add Glow blending mode. To create the effect, we duplicate the top layer and rasterize it. Then we go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur and play with the settings until we achieve the result we want. And to finish the design, I added some light particles and that's it. Here is the final result with a color variant. We can use the clipping mask function to apply textures over our text. This lets us move the texture and place it wherever we want inside the pixels of the object below. Here I created a white border by making the subcolor and the color white and using the border effect. I use the multiply blending mode. Then I keep experimenting with the placement and the shadow to achieve the final result. Here is the final result and another variant. Mixing techniques. Okay, in this section I will cover how to combine the techniques we learned previously to create 3D titles. And as you can see in this example, I started with the basic text with a drop shadow inside a layer folder. But this time I will duplicate the layer folder and then I will move it to achieve a 3D effect. As you can see, each duplicate creates a drop shadow between the color elements. I will keep stacking until I achieve the desired result. When the base is ready, we are going to duplicate the parent folder and merge it to apply raster effects such as the mesh transform. With a solid base, we can easily create different effects. Here I created a gradient over the main text and clip it. Then I experiment with different blending modes until I achieve the result I liked. Then I merge them and apply a ripple effect. This is the final result. In this example, I turn the shadows into grayscale and I will color it using a clipping mask and a gradient. This way, editing colors is really easy. We can use the hue and saturation tool to quickly test different color palettes. Here is the result and a variant, changing the angle of the shadow and using transformation. For this effect, I have a layer with a border effect, a layer with a clipping mask with a gradient, and a texture in a clipping mask for the layer on top. Again, I duplicate the parent folder and merge it. I set the blending mode to add glow. Then we can apply filters such as motion blur to achieve a more dynamic look. In this last example, I will create a 3D title for a comic by combining the different techniques. For the base, I started with the basic drop shadow and duplicated to get a starting volume. Then I used the layers effects to color the whole folder and to give it a border. And then I also added a border in the top layer to achieve the final look for the base. To get more space between the letters, I edit the original text by adding word spacing. Now that I have a solid base, I will add hand-painted elements to achieve a more refined look. First, I created a multiply layer above the shadows and clip it. And then with a soft brush, I started painting and experimenting until I achieved the result I wanted. We can experiment with lighting and creating more layers on top with different blending modes and applying textures. Of course, we can use any drawing tool we want. It's easy to experiment since we can always go back to the original base if we need. Try to create a solid base as a starting point before you apply raster effects. That way, if we need to edit the text, it's easier to achieve a good result in a short amount of time, and try to work in a non-destructive way. My title, I added a texture on top and some color layers. Then I duplicate and combine the whole effect, turning it to black, and apply a Gaussian blur to achieve a soft shadow. I created a quick book cover to use this title. Using the same techniques as before, I created an editable number. I can edit it to create the different issues for the comic, for example. And here is the final result. In this section, I will show you how to create simple animations using keyframes and layer mask to animate the designs we created previously. Since they are editable, we can use it for titles and logos, easily creating different results we can share in social media. I will show you the basics. First, we need to enable the timeline panel. We click Window, Timeline. Then we click Create New Timeline. And we can choose our frame rate and length. Here we can control all the parameters of our animation. We select the layer we want to modify and click Enable Keyframes. Then we have access to all the parameters. We can select which parameter we want to add a keyframe and click Add a Keyframe. Now we can advance in the timeline, and if we change the opacity in this case, it will create a keyframe and it auto animates. If we want, we can move the keyframes or delete it, and we can always add more keyframes in between if we want to change the timing. If we select the transform and click Add Keyframe, it will add a keyframe for all the parameters. Then it will keep track of our movement. We can change scaling and rotation using the Object tool. Then if we change the original file, it will update and keep our animation. I will combine these simple tools to create my animations. As always, try to get familiar with the basics first, and then you can combine them to achieve more complex results. In this example, I animate the opacity of the layer on top to create a glow reveal. First, I enable keyframes for the layer and create a keyframe on the opacity at 0%. Then I move in the timeline and turn the opacity up. This creates the animation. To get a cooler glow effect, first I will duplicate the layer and rasterize it. Then I can apply a Gaussian blur to create a more dynamic effect. Then I create more duplicates until I achieve the desired effect. Then I need to enable keyframes for all the duplicates and make the opacity animation. This is the final result. Now I will create a color reveal using a texture image and clipping masks. I place the image on top, then clip it to the text. I can also add a layer mask to make the transition smoother. Then I create keyframes for the position and animate it to create the color reveal. Here's the result. Then I also played with a gold texture, and using the same steps I create a shine. In this example I will create a 3D effect by animating the position of the layers. I enable the keyframes and move the layers until I achieve the result I wanted. Finally I play with the keyframes to get the correct timing for the animation. For the final result I added a small flash of white by adding a clipping mask. Here are a couple of retro animations using the same technique, and I also played with rotation instead of position to achieve a clean modern look. As my final tip, I will show you how to use layer mask to create dynamic reveals. We can place our animation inside a parent folder and then create a layer mask. Then we can animate the mask position to create a reveal effect. In this example I also created a line to support the graphic effect. Here's the final animation with the line added on top. As you can see, we can create interesting animations by simply combining the basic functions. Okay, this is the end of the tutorial. I hope you can apply some of my tips to your own work. If you have any question, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to be creative, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!